Welcome everyone to the Voice of Meaning. Today I need to warn listeners that the topic will cover suicide and suicidal thoughts. And if this disturbs you, please turn it off, possibly dial 988, the suicide hotline. Our goal is maybe someday this can prevent one person from doing it. There's been a marked increase over the last 2 years in the suicide rate of our country. And the CDC said last year in 2022, about 50,000 people took their lives. That's about one every 10 minutes. This is a very serious subject, and I'd like to further go deep in this area. Ulrich has been a therapist for about 48 years, and I'd like Ulrich, for you to talk about how you got involved in doing this, how suicide came into your counseling, and what are your insights from working with people. So go ahead, Ulrich.
Well, thank you, Neil. I've been doing counseling unofficially since high school. It's been all around me, primarily because it's that 800-pound gorilla that's in front of us. Most people, at some point, have these thoughts. They find that the emotional pain or the physical pain or the situation they got themselves into has no solution, and so they have these thoughts. Of that, a percentage make the attempt, and of those, a percentage succeed. And it not only does it have the impact on the life of a person, but it also has a major impact on those that remain. In my life experience, I'll talk about a couple things. There are two contexts that I see when talking about this subject, and that is there's the professional context. When I see people, when I saw people, I'm retired now, but when I saw people, a fair percentage of the people that came to my practice had suicidal thoughts. That's what brought them to the practice. I also worked in a closed mental health unit in a hospital, and most of the people that showed up there also were dealing with suicidal thoughts, and some with unsuccessful attempts. So that's the professional context, and I learned probably the most important thing to remember is that by not acknowledging it, me as a therapist or as a friend, but by me not saying, is there something going on in your life right now that is really affecting your thinking? And usually they'll say, yeah, I'm really depressed. I've been thinking of ending it. So actually stating it, what's going on, what's happening, is better, because the central part of suicide is the feeling of not being heard, that you hurt, that you're at the end of your line. And if the person hears that somebody acknowledges there's something going on here. Let's talk. And I remember many times with friends talking all night long. They talk, I listen. That's the other important lesson. Is it's not very productive for someone to say, oh, all you have to do is this, or stop thinking about that. Think about this over here. That's not helpful. What's helpful is saying, I'm here. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I'm just going to listen. And they'll open up. And once they open up, they begin to get the idea that somebody is listening, not telling them. Because a lot of people around them are going to say, don't think that, because we have a fear in ourselves. That's why we don't talk about that 800-pound gorilla, because we're afraid. We're afraid that by acknowledging it, by speaking it, it may cause that person to actually follow through, which is not the case. It's the not acknowledging it, not listening, that gets a person to make the attempt. So in my own life, I had an uncle. Let me backtrack. There are a number of, lots of reasons why people attempt and commit suicide. Some of them are they feel that they've lost it all. They made a choice that they can't get out of, or the physical pain is too extreme, and that's something that older people like us often have to deal with, or people with cancer or other illnesses. So there's the different contexts. Well, in my uncle's case, it was what I would call a political suicide. He was in Germany during the Hitler years, and he took a stance that the authorities didn't like, and he was also an SS officer. So he was given the choice. Either choice would end up in the family being killed. So the choice that he took was he killed his own family and then killed himself. This was a very common thing in the German hierarchy. And then the state had a nice state funeral for him, which is sort of hurts even more for those that survived. And then so that's one reason that some people, not so much today, at least not in this country, but there are other reasons. When I was about 15, 16, I had some friends, and there was an older brother and a younger brother. And the younger brother really looked up to his older brother. He wanted attention from his older brother and from his older brother's friends. So he was always tagging along. And unfortunately, we, as most teenagers would do, we ignored him. Well, he ended up committing suicide when he was 16, I believe. And again, there's a lot of survivor's guilt. His parents, his brother, me, that we had to deal with. So, but there are other reasons too. So Neil, what are some of your experiences with the notion of suicide?
There have been far too many people that I knew that committed suicide. And you talked about survivor's guilt. I feel it in the case of a couple of my close friends in the past who have taken their own lives. But I think,
It's
yeah,
it's like if I just had called them the day before, or if I had, if I had just listened and had a cup of coffee with them on the weekend, and
right.
you know, it,
I think you actually gave us some really good advice, and that is to not give advice. It doesn't help. Um, if somebody is in despair or depressed, advice doesn't help, but listening does. I think this is very, very important as we encounter friends and acquaintances who are that way. Um, in your practice, were there situations where you felt you had to call 911 immediately and had people, to be dealt with very quickly? So it's just some of your experiences with your patients.
yeah, as a licensed counselor or therapist, you're required, if you suspect that a person is suicidal or uh, can't take care of themselves or may hurt others, um, you're required by law to call it in. And then what happens is a mental health professional, an MHP, which is what I also was at one point in my life, um, would come and evaluate that person and determine whether that person needed for 72 hours needed to be in a confined situation where they could be uh, sort of the rudimentary beginnings of some therapy. If it's a good unit, listening. If it's not a good unit, a lot of medication. Medication only helps in the immediate. It does not help in the long run. Um, it's the human touch that's really important here. Uh, I mean, that's one of the main reasons why people get in a situation is they feel like there's no one there that will listen. Um,
You shared with me that some of your patients actually did go through with it and some succeeded. Do you have guilt feelings over that?
some it's one of the things what I began to become aware of is when I was in the presence of a person uh, who was serious to follow through, there was a particular feel in the environment that I get in here. And if I catch that and follow through, um, chances are that person can make a turnaround and begin the process of actually through counseling resolve some of the issues that are they're dealing with. Um, if I don't listen to it, then or I only become aware of it afterwards, then there's the guilt feeling. I could have been a better therapist. I should have been more aware. I should have made that phone call. I should have, and that doesn't help. It really doesn't. Um, and I've actually had some. Well, it's hard for me to use the word funny experiences, but in a sense they were. I worked at a closed unit, and this lady who was a twin came in. It was all voluntary, so anyway, she came in, and she was highly suicidal. And I worked with her for the week that she was there. And just before she left, she came over and said, "Thank you for, for listening, and I feel a whole bunch better." And anyway, thank you. So I looked at her in the eyes and I said, if you feel suicidal again, I want you to call me. I want you to call me and then come in. Okay? All right. So I didn't expect to see her again. 3 weeks later, here she was back in the unit. And I said, what happened? I said, well, I started having these feelings again, hopelessness, and I was going to commit suicide. I was at the end of my rope. But then I thought about my son and the effect it would have on my son. She said, and then she looked at me. She said, then I thought about you and what you said, which, oh, I forgot to put that part in the beginning. I told her that if she did successfully commit suicide, I would follow her and I'd find her. And in a humorous way, I said that. Well, she said, I thought about you, and that you were gonna you were gonna follow me, not commit suicide, but follow me uh, to let me know that was the wrong choice. And she said, so I called and came in. So sometimes, I mean, it was a totally unorthodox way of approaching the situation, but it worked. It was just enough to get her to get out of that trance that she found herself in, and make the call to get help.
I think that's very,
Yeah.
very powerful. I have a memory. My mother passed away almost exactly 2 years ago, and not too long before she passed away, while she was still cogent, um, she told the four of us siblings that if you ever not get along, I'm going to come back and haunt you. And so we get along really well.
Yeah, there's no reason to take a risk.
Right. Yeah. I have a personal suicide account that I would like to share. And one of the reasons why we call this YouTube channel The Voice of Meaning. Would that be all right, Ulrich?
Yeah, that would be, it would add to the context of you know, the details and the facts from the CDC and stuff is one thing, but those get boring very fast. But personal stories, personal experiences that we tell is what people listen to. And so tell us your story.
Okay. And I've touched on this before, but I will go back to my maternal grandfather who, um, the day the stock market crashed in 1929, took his own life. Apparently, he had lost a lot of money, and he realized that he had some life insurance, and it would be enough that my grandmother could buy a house or two houses and start all over again. Turns out he shot himself in his garage, and his oldest son was the one that discovered him. It was pretty traumatic. My grandmother probably never forgave him. My mother was only 3. She doesn't remember vividly what happened, but she remembers the aftermath of this. We didn't even know this history until I was a teenager, because my mother hid it from people and said that your grandfather died young, in his early 40s, of a heart attack, which is not unusual. Well, in 1991, I was in the aftermath of a separation with my wife. I was not in good shape then. I had spent several years of being financially irresponsible and was in a lot of debt, facing bankruptcy proceedings. I let my health go. I was 5'5", 242 pounds. I would, I was so unhealthy that I couldn't stay awake during the day. I had sleep apnea, turns out. Um, Frequently would fall asleep in meetings and was not in good shape. I was only 41 years old that time. And
So that was close to your grandfather's age.
yes, and what's scary is I'm named after him, and he was an insurance agent for Prudential Insurance. I was involved in insurance with MetLife, and I had a significant amount of life insurance on my life that I accumulated. So I made the decision that I was going to take my life, but not in a moment of despair or a moment, there was a weapon handy. It was a calculated thing. I thought about it, and I thought about how guilty my friends and family might feel. So I schemed to make it look like an accident. And how I did that, we lived in Anchorage at the time, and I owned a small car. It was a Volkswagen Rabbit. And I noticed about 7 miles north of Anchorage, there was a viaduct over the highway. And it was the only one that there wasn't a guardrail between the highway and the base. And it was there was a curve in the road. And I realized if I pretended to fall asleep at the wheel and go straight into that concrete wall at the speed limit, which is 65 miles an hour, even with a seatbelt on, I would be toast. So that was my plan. Not only I made an insurance review appointment with a client that lived about 3 miles beyond that bridge. I put their file in the front seat of the car. It was a time for an annual review anyway. And I was certain that people would think, and I made the appointment for 7:30 in the evening. And people would think that, when I hit this viaduct and the car exploded and I died, the evidence was that I may have lost concentration because I frequently did that because of my ill health. Well, I still was determined to do it. And I was within maybe a second or 2 seconds of reaching that point where I was just going to move the steering wheel right at the right spot. And all of a sudden, I heard a voice. And the voice said, "Don't do it, break the pattern." It was very loud. And of course, it startled me to the point where I instinctively just drove right past. And if I were to figure out a way to turn the car around and have to pass over the median and back again, I thought, wow, I guess I'm not supposed to do it today. And it greatly affected me. I was wondering, was it the voice of my grandfather? Was it the voice? Maybe I was him. Maybe I was a reincarnation of him. In Orthodox Judaism and in all the Eastern religions, they believe in that. Um, I did tell this story to some people a couple years later. I even told this story to my mother, and her reaction was, I guess he was good for something, meaning, her anger, but she felt that maybe he did come back from the dead and stop me from doing it. I don't know.
Mhm.
Much later in life, um, about the year 2011, I shared this story with my mentor when I was studying to be an associate of logotherapy. And she was very clear. She said, no, that was your voice of meaning yelling at you to do the meaningful thing, which was not to take my life. So that's the reason why we've named this YouTube channel The Voice of Meaning, because it was yelling loud and clear. And my thoughts are, when we're feeling despair to the point where we think about taking our lives, and Ulrich, you could probably attest that most of us have had moments like that. We just don't talk about them. And maybe there's not a good friend or a therapist that can listen to you at that moment, that we do have, all of us, a voice of meaning. And
It's that
hopefully,
sense of, I'm not done yet. There's still things that I need to do.
yeah.
There is a tomorrow.
So again, there was no logic involved other than this loud voice telling me to break that pattern.
And
And
that is a really important part is, research has shown that families where there have been successful suicides, uh, the chances of future suicides in that family increase. Um, so like with my uncle, um, there've been moments where I've gotten myself into a bind in terms of the choices I've made, where I thought, this is it. Um, but by breaking that, which is what you've done, um, you've not only given yourself the gift to be able to follow the purpose that's still to be to be completed, uh, but you've given a gift to your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids by breaking that cycle. It's like with lots of other cycles in psychology. If these cycles occur within a family, they tend to propagate from generation to generation to some degree. Again, it's not, we're human beings. You can't just say this is going to happen or this is going to happen. There's a lot of flexibility and a lot of changes that can occur. And those of us that have had those thoughts and heard and listened to the voice of meaning, just like Viktor Frankl. I mean, basically, all he had was his body. The book that he had just finished had been destroyed. His family had been destroyed. He didn't even have proper clothing. And what he discovered is the first purpose is, I'm going to publish that book, which means it's in my head. I have to survive. And we all have stories like that. I have a story to tell. And that's one of the wonderful things about YouTube, is that it's a platform, and it's only the beginning. platforms like it, where we as human beings, all 8+ billion of us, can tell our stories. And it's going to be amazing to see what effect that has.
Yes, thank you. So in conclusion,
Well, I have one more
oh,
story to
one
go
more
on.
story before conclusion. Go ahead.
Okay. When I was a teenager in Bellevue, Washington, I along with 4 other teenagers and the local pharmacist, who he was getting a lot of questions from kids about drugs, and so he noticed there was a need for someone to listen, and he didn't have a lot of time since he was a pharmacist. So we formed an organization called East Side Youth Services. We called it Heads Up, and it was a place that we created where people could come in and have people listen to them. And it still exists after 54 years, which is amazing, actually. But in the summer when I graduated, there was this girl that came in. I was a peer counselor. My job was to sit in the big living room. The house was a little bit off kilter because the jacks that it was jacked up with, one side had collapsed. It was a very funky house. And she would come in every Friday evening, and we started talking and stuff, but she did most of the talking. I listened. And I don't even remember the things she talked about. For one thing, it's been 54 years ago. So a lot of details I don't remember. But all summer long, every Friday, she'd come in, and we'd have this conversation. I listened, she spoke. So then in the summer, I went off to college, to the university. And one morning in my dorm, in the cafeteria, I looked up from my porridge, and there she was. And hi, how are you doing? Are you going to the university here too? Yeah. And she said, I need to thank you for something. She looked at me and she said, I want to thank you because you listened this summer to me, and I'm alive. She said she was her life felt totally out of control, totally at the end. And because I listened, not because I told her how to feel and what to do, but I listened. She said, I decided it was okay to stay alive. And oh, by the way, I have a boyfriend. She was cute. And that made a huge impact on the direction of my life. Probably one of the top reasons I became a therapist was because I realized that I could be one of those people that people in pain come to and listens to them, not tells them what the party line is, how you should feel, but really listens to them, and maybe make a few dents in the human weave. So that was sort of a personal experience, but also sort of a forethought of my professional direction I would take later on in life.
Wow, thank you. That's a very powerful account. And the moral of the story is listen. You don't even have to be a good listener, just listen. Seek out a friend or two or relative who will listen. Do it for others.
It doesn't take a special talent. It
No.
just it you, all it takes is letting them know that you're listening, right? Just taking that listening stance. We all know what it is, but we often don't take that with someone who's we perceive as in pain, because our bias is I better not I, I, I better not acknowledge it. Just by acknowledging it, I might cause something to happen, and that's totally wrong. Um, if you feel that someone in front of you is having suicidal thoughts, speak it. Say, is there something going on? I get this feeling that you might be suicidal, and then you can make a. What my wife is also a therapist, and what we often do is we make a compact. We say, uh, would you be willing to sort of hold off on this for 2 weeks and come in and we'll talk. Usually the 2 weeks expands and expands, and pretty soon they realize that they've decided that they don't even need to have that compact. They begin to find the lighter, the nicer things in life that give them that sense of meaning, that energy, that and as a closer, I think I mentioned that there's this feeling I get when I'm in front of someone who is considering suicide, and I think it has to do with energy. I think a component in a person being at that point is that their energy goes in, which doesn't allow them to think, I can get through this, I can do this, and they need to be re-energized. And meaning and purpose are crucial to that.
Okay, well, I have an earworm that I'm going to pass to you. Just a little tune and a song that came to my head a couple hours ago, actually yesterday, that I'd like to sing. And I'm actually going to copyright it because maybe Taylor Swift or Lady Gaga will want to sing it. I'm going to sing the first verse, and if you have any thoughts about other verses, please share in the comments. Listen, listen, listen to your voice of meaning. Listen, listen, listen right now. Listen, listen, listen to your voice of meaning. Listen, listen, listen right now.